Okay, so we're back, and I'm going to be talking about refuting Dave Rubin and debunking the so-called regressive left. So today I want to talk about the so-called regressive left. I want to look at where this term comes from and the why and the how of its use. Then I want to spend some time defending the quote-unquote regressive left. And in order to defend them, I'm going to focus my arguments against Dave Rubin, host of the YouTube channel, The Rubin Report. I chose Dave not just because he's an outspoken critic of the quote-unquote regressive left, but also because I like the dude. I like his soft-spoken style, and I find his arguments convincing. That said, he's also wrong, and I'm going to tell you why. So first, some background. The term regressive left was first used by author and activist Maajid Nawaz, not to be confused with our Nawaz. Nawaz, formerly a radical Islamist, is now critical of Islam and what he perceives to be widespread bigotry within Muslim communities. He identified the regressive left originally as part of the left who are unwilling to confront or challenge bigotry that occurs within minority communities because they don't want to disrespect the practices of other cultures. Now, I'm sympathetic with this early definition of the term. I believe that bigotry should be condemned wherever it is found. I have no sympathy for fundamentalists who believe that, for example, homosexuality is evil, and I will condemn this belief regardless of the religion of the people who voice it. I do, however, also sympathize with the people, predominantly from the left, who are standing up for oppressed peoples, even if they occasionally turn a blind eye to bigoted practices. The technique of these lefties might not be perfect, but they're fighting the good fight, which is more than can be said for those who are so eager to find fault with them. Okay, so the term regressive left originally referred to members of the left who were unwilling to challenge bigotry found in minority communities. Since then, however, the term has grown to encompass anyone on the left who gets angry about practices they perceive to be oppressive. Here's a quick list of what the quote-unquote regressive left does. They get angry about offensive Halloween costumes. They get angry when bigoted speakers are invited to give lectures on college campuses. They get angry when public figures say or tweet racist or sexist things. They get angry by anything not, quote-unquote, politically correct. So I think you get the picture. If you're like me, your initial reaction to this list is probably something like, yeah, I've heard about those incidents, and I do not support banning Halloween costumes or kicking speakers, however wrong their opinions may be, out of college campuses. In fact, I really think this behavior threatens the freedom of speech. And I get that. This is also the same point that Dave Rubin or Bill Maher or Jonathan Haidt make. Freedom of speech is precious, and silencing people for their opinions is wrong, regardless of what those opinions might be. That is just a universal truth. Or is it? Let's unpack this a bit. Let's peel back the layers. I'm going to try to defend the quote-unquote regressive left. And in order to do that, I want to look at some of the stuff that Dave Rubin has talked about on his show. It's not my intention to take him out of context, and I hope that I'm being fair to him. I encourage everyone to check out his show. Links in the description. Dave regularly sets up a dichotomy between his group, which he never names, though he calls himself a classical liberal, and we know that his group believes in freedom and individualism. He sets up a dichotomy between this group and the opposing group, which he variously names the regressive left, or social justice warriors, or bigoteers, or the outrage machine. So let's pause here for a second, because this is really important. Question: why doesn't Dave name his group? The answer is probably that he respects the diversity of his group too much to give them a general label. But he does call the opposing group names. It follows from this that Dave either thinks his opponents belong to one big homogeneous lump, or he simply has no respect for them. Now, Dave might jump in here and say, listen, I don't need to have respect for them. Even though I disagree with what they say, I'll defend to the death their right to say it. To which I would likely respond with something like, but Dave, aren't you a little worried that there's a moral hazard in publicly criticizing a group that you respect so little that you're unwilling to engage with them beyond making a few blanket generalizations? And while I think that that's a very good point that I just made, the more important point about failing to recognize the multiplicity of your opponents and instead calling them a pejorative is that it shifts the discussion away from content and focuses it instead on some trait that's supposedly shared by the whole group. That's why, and I'm quoting Dave here, bigoteers are always looking for something new to be outraged about. This characterization completely eliminates any room for understanding the various motives or reasons that inform the action of the so-called bigoteers. Rubin is basically saying they have no reasons. They just want any excuse to get angry. And framing it in this way is strategic. That's because the motives and reasons behind this group's actions are diverse and intellectually challenging. It's much easier to reduce them to, oh, that outrage machine getting angry again for no reason, than to engage with them and try to understand why they think and act the way they do. Dave also says that the quote-unquote regressive left, quote, uses buzzwords and outrage to silence the rest of us who are trying to have meaningful conversations. This strikes me as a blatant hypocrisy. Dave is unwilling to engage with or even recognize the substance of his opponent's ideas. Instead, he resorts to calling them bigoteers and the outrage machine. And in the same breath, he accuses them of using buzzwords to silence meaningful debate. That's exactly what he's doing. Also, notice the implication that meaningful debate can only occur in his camp. Bigoteers, on the other hand, are only capable of outrage. So, according to Dave Rubin, the regressive left is a group of homogenous outrage seekers incapable of having a meaningful conversation. And that brings me to my first point in my defense of the so-called regressive left. There is no regressive left. It's a straw man, a deceptive generalization, a vicious mischaracterization. It doesn't exist. That's because the group that Dave so flippantly calls the regressive left is actually a diverse group of people with many good reasons to be angry about the continual propagation of oppressive behavior and speech in their society. Behavior and speech, by the way, that until recently was so normal that nobody recognized it as oppressive, except, of course, those being oppressed. In fact, the oppressors still generally don't consider this behavior to be oppressive. It's only with the recent addition of marginalized and oppressed voices into the public sphere that the mainstream is starting to wake up to how oppressive it's actually been this whole time. Which leads to my second point in defense of the quote-unquote regressive left. After centuries of intolerance to any voice that wasn't white, male, and heterosexual, and I know that Dave himself is homosexual, but the point still stands, it's a bit disingenuous now when non-white, female, LGBT voices have finally fought and won enough space to begin publicly rejecting the dominion of the old order. It's disingenuous now to preach the universality of open and respectful discourse. Dave Rubin talks about, I quote, the social justice warrior disease, and he associates it with intersectionality. He says his camp has to, quote, take back the narrative, and claims that, quote, the outrage machine will just dull us all down to the point where we won't share any original thought because we just don't want to deal with the repercussions. In all this, he's making assumptions about what counts as correct narrative and about what counts as original thought. I submit that he's got it backwards. Intersectionality is original thought. The narrative he's defending is the still dominant narrative, and it has its roots in centuries of racist, sexist thinking. His message, that the space for freedom of thought and speech is being eroded, is not only alarmist. The space he's referring to still characterizes the majority of the public and private sphere. To say it's being eroded is not just alarmist, but it's also inaccurate, because the space he's referring to was never a space for the freedom of thought and speech. It was, and still is, a space for the reproduction and further entrenchment of the dominant hegemonic narrative. We can't put brackets around 200 years of white men talking about the universal free and open exchange of ideas, while the whole time excluding women because they're not reasonable enough, and excluding minorities because they're intellectually inferior. We can't put brackets around that and then claim that now white male voices are actually the victim here because they're being interrupted and everybody deserves a fair hearing. The universal, free, and open exchange of ideas was never universal, never free, and never open. Rather, it's been centuries of white men talking. Now they're being interrupted. If they start claiming that that's unfair, well, oh my, this tiny violin here, it just makes me so sad. It just makes me cry. The people that Dave refers to when he talks about the quote-unquote regressive left are mostly young students. They may be the first generation in American history whose curriculum has included coursework aimed at understanding the history of racial and sexual oppression from the position of the oppressed. It's no wonder that they're sensitive to these issues in a way that older generations aren't. We should be embracing this sensitivity and encouraging these young people to explore new ideas about how to engage with a world founded on, whether we like it or not, founded on a racist and sexist ideology. Dave says, quote, "The biggest threat to free speech is that we are actively silencing ourselves. It's true that we should not silence ourselves out of fear. But that's much different from reflecting and recognizing how our speech, from reflecting on and recognizing how our speech and actions can contribute to a history of oppression and refusing to be complicit, deciding to change our speech and behavior. That's not self-censorship. It's a first tiny step towards social enlightenment." And that's my rant. So Dave Rubin,
that was a great rant.
Thank you.
That was a good rant.
I don't disagree with anything of that except that, what's the fucking point? He's not going to ever listen to that.
He's never going to listen. Dave, I hope you listen to this, man.
That's the fucking problem.
I've watched all of your shows, Dave,
That's the problem. I mean, you said this, you made this really good point, right? What is it? It was and still is a space for the reproduction and further entrenchment of the dominant and hegemonic narrative, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And they don't understand that at all. They really do not understand that. No. What they're saying is also just a way of furthering the dominant hegemonic narrative.
And that's the problem. And it's understandable why they don't see that way. Referring a little bit to, oh God, what's his name?
Jesus.
Oh, no, not that one. The other Italian.
Gramsci?
Gramsci.
Antonio Gramsci.
Yeah, because he said that the sort of the hegemony. Yeah, I know it's a hard word. The hegemony. It appears. The thinking, the thought behind the hegemony appears to us as common sense. Because we've been so I don't want to say indoctrinated. It's too easy, but we've
socialized.
Socialized to this thinking that it's self-evident to us. It appears so obvious, and so it's completely understandable that he would find this new kind of thinking, this sort of intersectional thinking, if you want to also put probably not quite exactly.
I think this goes back to our previous discussion about capital too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if capital is also the dominant hegemonic, power engine of power, right?
Yeah.
And this is just, again, so this guy, Dave Rubin, he's just, another way of appropriating sort of a narrative in order to push the boundaries of capital for capital.
Totally.
Right?
A good example, people in his camp, and maybe not exactly related to your capital point, but people in his camp, they oftentimes say, like, if this were the 60s and the civil rights movement was going on, I would totally be behind them. But I can't get behind Black Lives Matter because those people are crazy, right? But what they fail to recognize is that the dominant system has since then appropriated the civil rights movement, right?
Yeah.
So now it's become mainstream. So it seems it's part of our self-evident, the common sense thinking. Like, it's common sense that these black people in the 60s should have tried to get some recognition in society, And of course I would have supported that. But Black Lives Matter, they're crazy.
Yeah, they're too uppity.
Yeah, too uppity. But exactly. But the Black Lives Matter, they're actually fulfilling the exact same role now that the civil rights movement fulfilled back then. They are a break from the dominant narrative.
Yeah.
And in 50 years they will probably be appropriated,
and
then people like Dave Rubin 50 years from now will say, if I was back in the early 2000s, I would have totally been behind Black Lives Matter, but now whatever the black movement of my time, they're crazy. And this sort of trend will continue.
I mean, that's the thing. The thing is, like, when you first started with your thing on oh, you want to, okay. on regressive left, what I thought was like, okay, yeah, there is a regressive left. That's this, liberals, right?
Yeah.
Bill Maher, for instance, is
He's the regressive left.
Like the exact people who are calling for these things, who are sort of like a little left wing, are the regressive left, right? Because they're the ones who are also appropriating, expropriating these long narratives of struggle that we've had, and making them into like.
Like it was their idea to begin with.
Their idea to begin with.
I mean, I would like to, for example, I'm familiar with the work. I mean, I've not listened to Dave Rubin, but I
should though. I mean, I actually really like Dave Rubin.
I'm familiar with the work of, for example, Majid Nawaz, right? And for somebody who's read a lot of his stuff or listened to him, the guy has no intellectual depth. Okay, I don't know. I don't understand why people. I mean, no, seriously, I'm not joking, right? I've heard, for example, I am, for example, particularly interested in this sort of post-colonial literature, post-colonial movements, and sort of post-colonial thought generally, right? So if there's somebody who claims to represent, for example, as Majid Nawaz does, that he knows the Islamic tradition well enough to be able to internally criticize it, right? What is his intellectual forte? I mean, what sort of a work has he done?
They don't have any.
That's what I'm trying to say. The only credit the guy has done, the only credit the guy has to his name is that he was a part of the Muslim Brotherhood. He served jail in Egypt. That is where somehow MI6. This is my reading of it. MI6 converted him, told him, dude, you're gonna get hanged. Just come back, convert, work for us. You'll go on TV, you'll be famous, everybody will know you, right? And that's an easy, sell out. Now, where is the intellectual commitment? Where is the change that I see this guy, being converted to all these liberal values that he now claims to be defending? And the point is that his criticism particularly refers to what he calls the bigotry in Muslim communities, right? But what is he doing about it? Plus, how has he tried to engage with the community? Why is he getting back at the left? If he is so well entrenched within this, within the Islamic tradition as he claims to be, why hasn't he come out and said, okay, this is how it should be, right? And not the standard general, Islamophobic rant that we hear from a lot of these people. Either assimilate or you're just, boom.
They can't say, however, how it should be, because their narrative of how it should be is also a really horrible, racist, backwards narrative.
But I mean, for example, Majid Nawaz, you cannot say that. The guy is from Pakistani. The guy has Pakistani origin, so you cannot use that labels for him, right? Which is why it's easier for him to get back at the left. Say, well, I'm from this.
In general, like all these, Rush Limbaugh as well is a perfect example I guess Dave Rubin is like the modern day sort of maybe not.
He's like the nice Rush Limbaugh. He's pretty much like the people you see in the alt-right, except he's not quite as loud. And occasionally he makes more liberal points. He does have a kind of liberalism. I'll give the guy that. He believes in a social liberalism.
Well, let's talk about liberalism a little bit. That's why I said the regressive left. Okay, that's the liberalism part of left. Liberalism is a spectrum that that encompasses
so much.
Because liberalism is exactly what we were talking about before. It's the expropriation of things. In the idea of freedom, you can do whatever you want, right? And of course, you can do whatever you want. Sartre says that, right? We have radical freedom, but you also have other things.
No. You're right. But what I'm trying to say is, because as I understood what Shell was talking about, is that Dave Rubin is purposely not trying to label himself. Right? Now, if you claim yourself a liberal, right, there is so much within liberal political thought that is precisely counter what he's talking about, right? If you stand for freedom, how could you question someone else's freedom? On what grounds do you do that? Right?
Exactly.
Because they're horrible, and But that's a really good point. This is something. I'm glad you bring this up, because this is something that conservatives. He seems to be a conservative liberal. We're using liberal, by the way, in the European sense, not the.
It gets very confusing. Somebody needs to explain to these people what the left is. Because the left is an idea about the relationship between capital and labor. Being a social liberal, believing in like gay marriage and stuff, that's great. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're on the left. They're totally. You could be on.
But that's like conservative peoples, or these people, they tend to not like labels. I've noticed. Like I've Jeremy Clarkson. I don't know if you guys know this guy.
Yeah.
And Jeremy Clarkson, he also hates labels as well, and because they hate to be defined as something because I don't know. Maybe it has something to do with the lack of intellectual depth that they have, that they just don't even know what the hell they're talking about the entire time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the part of what's happening over here is all these people are getting this attention because what they're saying is, you know, it's something that, you know, people can relate to in the shallow sense. They're not talking serious stuff, right? Which is, I mean, I know, for example, Majid Abbas has a lot of following, right? Has a lot of following amongst both Muslims and non-Muslims, right? Precisely because, you know, this guy, you know, who comes out, whose claim to fame is that he was, you know, in an Egyptian prison because he was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now this guy's coming out and pointing out all the problems with Islam, right? Right? And this requires a lot of guts to do that. So I give him his, you know, fair amount of respect for that. But beyond that, when you come and question a whole religious tradition, right, without engaging in any sort of serious conversation with somebody who can defend this truth, I mean, who is he talking to? Who is he having conversations with? You know, is he talking to Tariq Ramadan? Is he talking to Ibrahim Musa? I mean, who is he talking to?
People in the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Exactly.
Who
is
really
he talking to?
Afraid of Muslims.
Exactly. Who have no clue about, you know, where the Muslim intellectual tradition is coming from.
That's the point of all this. I mean, the same with, I guess, Dave Rubin. He's basically talking to the group of people who already they need to hear these things, right?
Yeah, well, these things appear very familiar to most of us because they're part of this hegemonic thinking, you know, and so you know, and things like Black Lives Matter and intersectionality, you know, they seem foreign and strange and scary, you know, but that's where progress comes from, you know, progress comes from a break with the sort of mainstream stagnating idea, you know, and then the mainstream will at some point adopt it and appropriate it.
I think that's how it's been, you know, when for example John Locke, you know, wrote against the monarchy, right? Until about then, you know, in mainland Europe, there was an absolute unquestionable truth that kings were representations of God. It was only when, you know, Locke came and questioned this sort of tradition and saying, well, actually not, you know, power is coming from people because we submit to the political authority of the king.
And people probably thought he was totally crazy.
Yeah, totally.
You know?
Absolutely.
If Dave Rubin was back then, he would have been like, come on. You know, the power comes from God and it was given to the king.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that, you know?
It's so hilarious how all this repeats itself, right?
Yeah.
But speaking of repeating itself, I'm going to close this down, this discussion, and
we do repeat ourselves to the end.
Yes. The morale.
Yeah, and I'm gonna get into the morale, which is via actually no, I want to get into. I first want to do the shout out, I think, because
do the shout out.
Yeah, I want to do the shout out because the morale should end the thing. So yeah, the shout out is
the moral economy is going to be part of this.
Yes, the moral economy is proud to announce that it's going to be part of the Challenging Capitalist Modernity Conference, the third one, in Hamburg at the University of Hamburg, and the subtitle is called "Uncovering Democratic Modernity: Resistance, Rebellion, and Building the New." And here is just the blurb from their website. Capitalism is stuck in a structural crisis and losing legitimacy worldwide, despite the claim that no alternatives exist. At the same time, right-wing and reactionary movements offer themselves as alternatives. But there are other ways than the seemingly only alternatives. Lots of alternatives here, guys. In Rojava, North Syria, it was possible not only to take sides, but to establish an own third way. The building of a non-patriarchal system and a democratic economic order seems within reach and has the chance to establish itself permanently. Such third ways are possible everywhere in the world, and our third world conference, we want to present, shed light on, examine, and discuss them. The third conference, Challenging Capitalist Modernity 3, Uncovering Democratic Modernity, Resistance, Rebellion, and Building the New, is taking place around Easter, the 14th to the 16th of April, that's next weekend, 2017, in Hamburg. The past two conferences brought together not only leading intellectuals, such as David Harvey and
David Graeber,
but also gave young activists, students, and scholars a chance to present their ideas. In this third conference, we want to once again build bridges between all these movements in Kurdistan and worldwide. Dear friends, this is the invitation. You may have participated in one of our past two conferences, Challenging Capitalist Modernity 1, Alternative Concepts and the Kurdish Case in 2012, Challenging Capitalist Modernity 2, Dissecting Capitalist Modernity, Building the Democratic Confederalism in 2015. I was there. For 3 days, hundreds of students, intellectuals, and activists and movements came together and discussed not only what they criticized, but also how and what they wanted to be. Many ideas from around the world and that of the Kurdish freedom movement came together to strengthen their practices. We are excited to invite you to our third conference, Challenging Capitalist Modernity 3, Uncovering Democratic Modernity, Resistance, Rebellion, and Building the New. Really, guys, talk about repeating yourself. This conference is taking place again on the Easter weekend, 14th to 16th of April, 2017. In this third conference, we will continue to focus on the critique of the capitalist modernity, but this year we will discuss the obstacles and how these obstacles can be overcome. The main theme of this year's conference is the importance of being organized and to be in solidarity. We will not only immerse deeper into the problems, but also in the proposed solutions. This year, we will continue with the tradition of call for papers, but additionally there will be working groups and workshops. Please check the website, that's networkaq.net, for updated information on them. You can still register for the conference by writing to registration@networkaq.net. And I just want to say I'm very excited about these working groups. I'm somewhat involved in organizing this conference. The workshops will, be a great space for us to have discussions, much like our moral economy propaganda podcast discussions. But even better are the working groups, because the working groups will be people who work, discuss topics, themes in our lives, and who will be meeting twice in the next 2 years and organizing the next conference, which will be in 2019. And that's really cool. So you guys should come. Definitely
Totally, yeah.
come.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Can I do the morale?
Yeah, if you want to do the
I
morale.
like to
Can you just read it?
Yeah, I'll just read it.
Yeah.
So the morale is called Now a Girl is My Homeland. Sexy. And I guess it's a Kurdish poem?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here she comes. Oh, lovers. Here she comes herself. In the fall leaves, clothed, with 19 yellow years, with 19 dark lights, with 19 green chalices, with the homesick autumn butterfly. She is on the way. She is coming to you. I beg you, when she arrives before you, I beg you, in the hearkening sky, offer her your hearkening bird. In your eyes, behold her closely with your eyes. Reach into your bosom. With a kiss of the sight, offer her the apple of your heart. She is the ode of a wild and cold wind, wounded on the streets and in your homes, so heartbroken a wind, so hopeless a rain. A book repulsed by its own language. This is the tale of oppression, the spectacle of the deceptions and machinations of hands and fists of yours all. Here she comes, O lovers, here she comes, she herself comes. This beloved, with the land and burned flower of the land she has picked, here she comes. With her she brings the remembrance of a victim here. Here she comes, O lovers.
Yeah, that is a revolutionary poem by a revolutionary poet, Sherko Vikas, and I think that ties really well with the theme of democratic imperialism and our upcoming conference.
Perfect.
And so with that, the Moral Economy propaganda podcast will end, and we hope to do another podcast soon. It's been a while.
And share.
Yeah.
Like, comment, share.
Comment and share. So you can find us in YouTube, Propaganda Podcast. You can find us on Twitter, Propaganda Podcast. No, I think it's something else actually. But if you can find the Moral Economy at mainstreamidea.com. We've got the Moral Economy in Facebook and also Propaganda.
And I look forward to hearing from Dave Rubin.
Yeah, Dave Rubin.
I'd like to get
Drop
his
us a line.
thoughts about what I said. And,
Yeah, we'd like to talk to you.
And stay critical, everybody.
Yeah, stay critical.
Stay critical.
Organize.
Organize. Peace out.